Welcome to the Probate Nation. I am Richard Ruddy. Probate estates holding real estate often need to sell it to pay the debts and then the bequests of the decedent. Conservatorships often need to sell the real estate to pay for the medical and other care needs of the incapacitated adult. Sounds simple enough, but you are a fiduciary with fiduciary obligations. So what should you do to maximize the sale price and get the property sold sooner rather than later? Good question. But I would add it is just as important to know what you should not do. Our show today is the first of a two-part series that focuses on the process of selling real estate in a Virginia estate or conservatorship. And we are delighted to have two experienced realtors as our guests. They will address the do's and don'ts, along with a host of other suggestions they encourage you to keep in mind. If you are a Virginia executor or conservator, I encourage you to sit back and soak up the wealth of information they will be sharing. Let me tell you a little bit about our real estate professionals. Our first guest has been a licensed realtor in Virginia since 2004. Each year thereafter, she has annually earned many awards in recognition of her work as a realtor, including Northern Virginia Award-winning Realtor and Sales Quality for Sales and Quality, and Washingtonian Magazine's Best Realtor. She's been married to her husband Eric for 32 years, and together they have raised two wonderful children in McLean and are blessed with two grandchildren. Our second guest is a lawyer, is a Washingtonian by birth, a lawyer by training at the George Mason University School of Law, and a realtor by choice for over 40 years. He is a real estate agent with Long & Foster and Forbes Global Properties. He's licensed in Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. He and his wife, Maureen, have four miraculous children and two delightful grandchildren. Please welcome Virginia Realtors, Kelly Ovason and Hill Slewinski. Guys, welcome and thanks so much for joining us for these programs. You know, the first thing we want to talk about, that I'm going to talk about a little bit, is who can list the property for sale. So this is very much an important first step in the process of listing and selling real estate in Virginia for an administrator or a conservator. And this becomes a bit of a complicated analysis. In the case of an estate, the executor, you need to look to the will admitted to probate. Did the will direct that real estate should be sold? And if not, is there a need to sell the real estate? And if so, was a court order obtained authorizing you to sell? Because basically you're taking it out of the hands of the beneficiaries. Absent will authority and a need for the estate to sell the property or a court order directing it to be sold, the executor has no authority over the real estate. All that authority belongs to the heirs of the decedent under the will or under the intestate laws. In the case of a conservator, the court order appointing the conservator should be examined. And in the case of an agent using a power of attorney, you need to be careful that that power of attorney actually gives them the authority to sell the real estate. Preferably, the power would specifically describe it in the power of attorney so we know they have that authority. But much of the foregoing has been previously discussed in prior shows, which you, our listeners, can view on the Probate Nation website. So let's go and start to talk now about what are the initial steps of things people need to do. So Hill, in an estate, should the executor obtain a date of death appraisal versus relying on the county tax assessment, and why?
Richard, yes, they should, because if the property owner has died, then the date of death appraisal is necessary to establish the new tax basis in the real estate. The appraisal is done by a licensed appraiser, and it's a much more detailed document. This will minimize the capital gains on the sale of the real estate. The appraisal really does a detailed analysis of the property, and it compares specific factors and characteristics of the property with other properties that were sold recently or nearby the date of death.
Okay. Now, on the other hand, let's talk about the conservator. Does a conservator need to get an appraisal of the real estate once they get qualified?
The conservator does, because they need to find out if there was a previous owner, co-owner, or a previous spouse who passed away earlier. And in that case, they may have to get a retrospective appraisal of the property.
But if otherwise, if they've owned the property and no one who had previously owned it with them has died, they can the appraisal doesn't really do them much good, right?
No, no, exactly.
Okay. How about, let's talk about, market analysis. Hill, what is a market analysis?
Market analysis that we perform as agents is really a comparative or competitive market analysis to show what has sold, what has not sold, and what's currently on the market. That's a way we can gauge to see what the market environment might be. It's really a comparison of other homes that are nearby that have a similar structure, similar number of bedrooms and characteristics, and also a gauge onto how long has it taken for previous homes to sell, what homes did not sell, and possibly finding out why. Was it overpriced? Was it the condition of the property? And those that are still on the market now shows what the competition that we as sellers are dealing with when it is trying to sell properties in a similar neighborhood or nearby.
So, whether or not, even though we might have gotten a date of death appraisal, it's still important to have a market analysis done, because it might be that somebody might have died on January 1st, but they may not get around to actually looking at selling the property to July 1st. Okay, so it might very well be that a lot of things might have happened in the 6 months since they actually got the appraisal done. And plus, of course, the market analysis, as you say, does cover a lot more topics. Kelly, tell me, what are some of the lessons that you've learned, as far as getting the market analysis done? What are some of the things that you have learned over the course of your career?
Well, a lot of times if people did do an appraisal, they kind of think that is the price that they should be going on the market at. But, we've learned a lot in the last couple of years. Like, for example, when, 2020 hit, March was a far cry from September. So things changed just in, like you just said, Richard, in the few months that oftentimes, since the person has passed away. So definitely have to kind of look at the most recent things that have happened in the neighborhood and nearby. And, if there's been a house that's around the corner that sold for one price, you can't expect a ton different unless your property is totally different. So yes, you have to do the most recent current times look at what's happened nearby.
Okay. Now, one of the topics one of the things that we always comes up, Kelly, of course, as we look at things to do is, of course, cleaning out the property. Getting everything out, emptying the house out of emptying the contents. Can you explain, why that's important?
Most of the time, my clients have a lot of need to empty a house out to get it ready for market. And as a realtor, Hill and I both focus on what it's going to be that will get that client the top dollar for their future. And oftentimes that is emptying the house out, getting it freshly painted, sometimes fixing that garbage disposal or renovating that bathroom to make it move-in ready, because buyers have very little vision. And truly, I always say, you don't get married in jeans and a t-shirt. You don't put your house on the market until you look beautiful that day.
Okay.
Same with the house.
So, I agree with you. Now, one of the things that I've always heard, and I want to get your thoughts out, is, certainly when people go to buy a house, often they have, we'll talk about this later, often they have contingencies that allow them to have an inspection of the house by their inspector. But do you encourage prospective sellers to go ahead and have a pre-inspection evaluation done by themselves to identify any problems in advance of putting the property on the market?
I do believe it's important to take a long, good look at that house. And oftentimes someone like Hill or myself can go and do that with the client. I don't love to have drama invited, and that's a pre-inspection with an actual home inspector that costs $700, $800, because those people are licensed to pick a house apart, and truly, oftentimes we can discover those things and save the seller a lot of time and money. And also, if we find out from that inspector something has been disclosed, we have to disclose it. So I'd rather just go through the house and basically address every objection that could hit us and address that garbage disposal, because the garbage disposal could be fixed for a few $100s, but the buyer is going to think, holy cow, that whole house needs, so much work, thousands and thousands of dollars. And they always exaggerate what the real costs are. So to fix that bathroom or fix that, minor problem on that appliance or whatnot, you're better off fixing it versus having a buyer discover it or their home inspector discover it, because it's always way more expensive then.
And Hill, how about yourself, Hill? Do you encourage having a pre-home inspection done for the seller before they actually put the property on the market?
It depends on the property. If the property is in excellent shape to begin with and the owners have taken good care of it and recently remodeled it, it may be a good idea just to have a home inspection, but really it's their choice. I wouldn't recommend a full home inspection. We as agents are trained to observe, what are the features of the house that could be improved fairly easily. And anything that is something that might just jump out at a buyer as being a problem, we try to fix that to begin with. So we don't really do the full home inspection unless the seller wants to, or the executor wants to do it. It's for their own benefit, but we try not to open any can of worms that we're not familiar with already.
Okay. Well, the last thing I want to talk about is confirming who has the authority to list and actually sell the property. And so, Hill, do you normally recommend that people have a title search done even before they list a property for sale?
Not the formal title search. As an agent, I go into the land records or the recorder of deeds or the tax records to see if there's consistency in the naming of the owners. If there's an inconsistency there, then I might have a title attorney do a title search. Occasionally, we might find that one of the parties wants to sell it, but the other party has passed away, but they're still on the deed. That's not a problem, but it's good to know ahead of time.
Okay. Kelly, how about yourself? What has your experience been, and what do you recommend as far as confirming, based upon your experience, confirming who has the authority to actually act with this property?
I agree with Hill. You don't need to do a full title search, but usually double checking the tax record, and oftentimes people like you, Richard, are encouraging or recommending Hill or myself to sell that property. So they've already often known who the actual authorized seller would be.
Okay, let's talk about a topic that people can widely disagree on, property repairs and improvements. Kelly, in today's market, let's just begin with, what does the typical buyer look for when in a home to buy?
As far as what a buyer is looking for, unfortunately, in today's world, buyers are somewhat picky and they really want it to be move-in beautiful, move-in ready. Again, you don't walk down the aisle in jeans and a t-shirt. They expect that property to look like they were walking up to the wedding day. When they walk up to the front door, they want to know that the house is in good shape. Otherwise, in today's world, they take a pass. Now, many, many years ago, when I bought my first home in the 80s, early 80s, I like the idea of fixing things. Today's buyer wants instant gratification. They want it move-in ready. They don't have as much vision as, that fixer-upper that we'd be willing to buy years and years ago. Now they want it move-in perfect. They want it magazine ready. So I totally recommend getting a property really ready for market and making it look beautiful. Otherwise, you're not going to get top dollar. And most importantly, the process isn't going to be as pleasant because buyers will pick it apart and you're going to get less money in the end, and it's going to be a lot longer of a sales process.
So I think that's connected with, and this comes to my next question is how important is it to assess the homes, Kelly, that the property you're going to try to sell will compete with the property once it's listed for sale?
I love that question because I do believe it's super important to look around, look at the neighborhood. And oftentimes before I even meet a seller, I'll call the other realtors in the neighborhood that have sold recently and ask what the market's like, what their experience was as far as selling those properties. And they'll tell me what they had done to get it ready. And so you do need to assess in the last 180 days, what's happened nearby, what kind of home sales have happened, how it all worked out, and what they had done, because you are going to be competing against that price that they got. So yes, you do need to look at that. And to be perfectly honest with you, every single buyer is going to be looking at, if they have a good realtor, what those homes have sold for and what they look like. They may not be able to get in, but they're looking at those pictures long and hard before they decide what price to offer that seller. So to know the competition is important, and oftentimes I'll print it out and say, these are the available properties in this area, in this school district that you have as an opportunity to look at in comparison. And, you know, people will compare the price of that property, the condition of that property, and the location of that property. So all of those are important to take in consideration when you're pricing that price or pricing that property or even thinking of selling that property.
So tell me, so this kind of comes back to, I guess you're stressing, it's important to put the buyer hat on as you look you look at your property, and what are you looking to assess then as when you put that buyer hat on?
Good way to word it. You're totally right. You need to look at, you know, as if you were going to buy that house. And so when you're meeting with that seller to consider what's involved in getting ready for market, we need to say a buyer's going to come in and see that little toilet that leaked, you know, 10 years ago and it's inside a closet, so you didn't care, but they do care, and they would consider that problem to be a bigger problem than it really is. It's not leaked anymore for 10 years, but we need to make it beautiful and paint it over and clean and make sure the plumbing is not a concern anymore. So yes, you got to look at it as if you're a buyer, and you know, most buyers don't want to take on a seller's concerns, whether it's the leaky toilet that leaked 10 years ago or remodeling that bathroom or painting and putting a fresh coat of paint. They, as buyers, want it to be move-in ready.
Now, Hill, should all these, you know, you and Kelly as experienced realtors, you walk through the property, you identify things that need to be fixed, whether it's painting, carpeting, flooring, bathrooms, kitchens, and the list can go on and on. Should all of these deficiencies identified in whether it's by real estate assessment or if you happen to have a home inspection, should these all be taken care of before you put the property on the market?
It depends on the resources that my client might have when he's selling the property. They may or may not have a whole lot of money to renovate the kitchen, but if they can do some of the simple things, the easiest things are to paint and to refinish the floors in the older homes. Most buyers will have a home inspection done in this environment now, or they will do a pre-contract inspection, so they'll know ahead of time what's wrong with the house that, in their eyes. Most sellers may be interested in making the repairs, and the buyers are asking for concessions in some areas. In other hot neighborhoods, the buyers are not asking for concessions because they're competing against 5, 6, 12 other offers. The difference between what happened in 2021 and 2022 was it was such a hot market, buyers were submitting offers with no concessions, no financing, no contingencies for repairs. So it was easier for us. It was much more of a seller's market then than it might be now. It's getting back down to normal.
So it sounds to me from what you're saying, Hill, though, I think as we kind of lead to our next session and get to some closing comments, that even if you've identified work that needs to be done, that not everything necessarily has to be done. It can be handled by way of some concessions to the buyer, so they can use that money as they seem fit to fix whatever they want to fix among the things that have been identified. Is that correct?
Yes, but there's also a caveat with that. When a seller is making repairs in response to a buyer request for a concession or repairs, you have to be careful because some buyers may not accept the repairs that the seller has completed. That's why we often recommend that they use licensed contractors to do the repairs. Some sellers like to do it themselves, and unless there's a requirement for a permit to be pulled, they usually can do it themselves if they're skilled in it, but I recommend that they use contractors.
I think that's a good point. Now, Kelly, some of the lessons learned on your end, as far as dealing with, repairs and stuff like that. What can you add to our discussion here?
As far as repairs, I do highly recommend a licensed contractor because, it can come back to bite you later on. Getting the work done ahead of time is always what I highly recommend because you're just going to get a faster, nicer home sale process and much more money in the end.
Okay, good.
Richard, one other conversation we do have with the sellers also, sorry to interrupt, but if the seller is unable or unwilling to make the repairs, we also try to price the house appropriately, taking that into consideration when setting the list price.
Okay. Well, let's get some closing comments. Hill, I'll start with you. Given what we've talked about so far as listing and selling a piece of real estate, that's in an estate or a conservatorship. Give me some of your final, words of advice or comments you want to share as we wrap up this particular program.
In advising sellers on how to price their property, the benefit that Kelly and I bring to the table is that we have our pulse on the market. We know what buyers are looking for. We also know what other sellers are positioning their houses to do. We look at some other tools that we have available to us. One is called a home demand index, which tells us basically what is the online activity for listings on the MLS. Are a lot of them getting views? Are they going to the websites? If that activity level is higher, that is a home demand index that is broken down by Bright MLS into basically down to the zip code area to find out what the ranking is there. Another tool we use is one that counts foot traffic. And foot traffic is gauged by the number of appointments that are made on showing time with the realtors to show houses. So we have a good sense of what's going on behind the scenes, other than just the numbers about home sales, in the last 6 months or so. One other thing that we do, we take into consideration what the temperature of the market is. We try to find out what the emotional motivations are for the buyers, especially in a neighborhood that rarely has houses come up and you see there's a lot of interest in them. We also now have a good idea what the anxiety level and what the psychology of the buyers are when they're trying to get a house. Is this the first time they've tried or the 7th time they've tried? They are more likely to jump on something, and if they can get it, they'll pay a little more for it. But we know how they're thinking, and that's not anything we can pull out of the facts, out of the listings in the past.
Kelly, how about yourself? Some thoughts, lessons that you want to learn, or closing comments and words of advice based upon what we've talked about so far?
Well, I always like to say to a seller that, I understand where you're coming from, and I know your top priority is to get the house sold for top dollar and a pleasant, happy process. And hiring the right realtor who cares about you and your family and getting you that top dollar and is going to roll up their sleeves and just make it happen is important. They're going to help you with getting contractor, whether it's the plumber or the electrician or the landscaper or cut that huge tree that's blocking the house. All those little things make a big difference. If you spend a little extra now and hire the right realtor, you're going to have a happy process. You're going to make way more money. And I think that's what most sellers want. And in the end is to make it as pleasant as possible. It's a stressful time to sell your house. And our job as realtors is to take that stress away and to make you get the best results possible.
Well, certainly conservators who are handling estates handling assets as a fiduciary, or executors of an estate, they certainly want to get the property sold for a good price so they can defend what the price is, and they also want to get it done quickly, typically, because they have people that would like to get, would like to receive the proceeds from that house. So yes, I think it's important to, I think I take away that same sort of thought process, is to make sure you listen to and listen to what the professional have to say, because as Hill says, you have a better handle on the market and what people are expecting, and certainly what people expect, so that you may have some thoughts about how things should go based on your perspective when you bought or sold your house 20 or 30 years ago. And as you said, Kelly, things are very much different, and frankly, very much different from even 2 years ago, as we well know. So, hey guys, I want to thank you both very much for taking the time to talk with us and get this started with part 1 on how to sell real estate out of a Virginia conservatorship or an estate. Great public service, and I look forward to you guys returning, if you will, to help us complete this discussion when we get to part 2. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Selling real estate presents a host of challenges if you want to sell the property without delay for the best price possible. Our guest tonight shined a light on some of the initial to-dos as you undertake this task. Be sure that ownership of the property is proper with a title search, or at least check the land records. Have a look at what properties on the market will be competing with you so you have a better idea about what a buyer would expect. Make appropriate improvements and repairs that will serve to enhance the marketability of the property. But most importantly, I think, listen to the advice of real estate professionals who work in the marketplace every day. This concludes our show on part 1, but there is more to be done to sell that real estate, and our guests We'll complete this discussion next week in part 2 when they address staging and then list the property for sale, accepting an offer, and, of course, closing the deal. Until next time, on behalf of the Probate Nation, I want to thank you for visiting with us.